Thanks to advances in technology, the dedication of tireless investigators, and unexpected breakthroughs, the truth is finally catching up with time. Here are some of the cold cases that have recently been solved. Number 1. One cold September night in 1988, in a small city called Reidsville, North Carolina, two shady characters were engaged in an illegal drug deal involving a little something called Coca-Cola, if you catch my drift. At first, everything seemed to be going smoothly. That is until one of them decided to flip the script. He wasn't just going to take the package. He was taking the money too. Without warning, he bolted. Now, the other guy wasn't about to let this slide. He took off after the thief, adrenaline pumping. And this man? His name was Johnny Ware, a guy no stranger to run-ins with the law. But this night? This night would be different. This night would seal his fate. Johnny caught up to the runner. Paul Alexander tackled him to the ground and started beating him mercilessly. But Johnny wasn't alone. His brother, Pernell Ware, was close by, sitting in their car. Johnny screamed for his brother to come over, and well, let's just say he wasn't calling for backup to talk things out. When Pernell arrived, Johnny gave him a chilling command: shoot him, and Pernell did exactly that. 2 fatal shots to Paul Alexander's abdomen. With the victim lying lifeless, the Ware brothers grabbed the drugs, the cash, and fled the scene into the night. It didn't take long, just a few months, before both Johnny and Pernell were caught by the cops. They were sentenced to life imprisonment for taking out Paul Alexander and their involvement in the illegal drug deal. At this point, you might think, case closed, a shady deal gone wrong, the victim perished, and the bad guys got what they deserved. But here's what makes it weird. Fast forward to June 1994. Edward Ware, Johnny's uncle, was at home watching TV when there was a knock at the door. Standing outside was none other than Johnny Ware, his own nephew. Of course, Edward opened the door, and the two began chatting. But Johnny wasn't there for a friendly visit. He had other intentions. Johnny came to steal from his uncle. Whether killing Edward was part of the plan from the start, we'll never know. But at some point, Johnny decided to brutally beat the old man and stab him to death. He then ransacked the house, stealing whatever he could find before leaving. For Edward Ware's family, this was devastating. Worse yet, the case quickly turned cold. For years, investigators couldn't connect the murder to Johnny Ware. It wasn't until nearly 30 years later that advancements in DNA analysis, specifically S-Thermix technology, provided the breakthrough they needed. Investigators finally linked Johnny Ware to the crime. By then, Johnny was already serving a life sentence for Paul Alexander's case. If you're wondering what's strange about this case, well, remember when Johnny Ware and his brother, Pernell Ware, were sentenced to life imprisonment for what they did to Paul Alexander? So if both of them were in prison since 1989, then how on earth did Johnny manage to be out in 1994 to commit another crime and cause another family to mourn? The closest theories I could have found were parole or early release, escape from custody, errors in records or reporting. Whatever the reasons may be, at least now we can be certain he's staying in prison for good. Number 2. In broad daylight in May 1976, Lela Johnston, a 68-year-old grandmother, was sitting alone in her house in Oklahoma City when a man suddenly forced his way through the door. He attacked her and, tragically, ended her life. When the police arrived, they discovered Lela's lifeless body. They quickly uncovered the horrifying truth. Not only had someone attacked this elderly woman, but they had also violated her in the most unimaginable way. The case was deeply unsettling. No one could have imagined someone doing such a thing to her. Lela was a beloved grandmother who cherished her family, especially her grandchildren. People in the neighborhood described her as a kind and caring woman. Strangely, nothing had been stolen from her house. It left everyone questioning. Why would someone attack a random, sweet elderly woman who had no quarrels with anyone? Why take her life and then leave without stealing anything? Unfortunately for the family, solving the case would not come quickly. It took nearly 50 years before they finally got an answer about who committed this heinous crime. Thanks to the collaboration between the Oklahoma City Police Department's Cold Case Unit and DNA Labs International, DLI, there was finally a breakthrough in the case. By utilizing forensic investigative genetic genealogy, they uncovered critical new evidence. Using this method, genealogist Allison Martin Krinsky constructed a family tree that ultimately led investigators to identify Charles Droke as the perpetrator. It appears that Charles, who was 28 years old at the time of the crime, had broken into Lela Johnston's residence, where he brutally attacked the 68-year-old grandmother in her home. It remains unclear why Charles committed such an evil act. Was this a premeditated crime, with Lela specifically chosen as his victim, or was it a random decision made in the moment? In my opinion, I believe the crime was premeditated. Charles likely knew that Lela was an elderly woman living alone and would be unable to defend herself. So, what happened to Charles Droke? 13 years after committing this heinous crime, he got into an argument with his brother, Edwin Laverne Droke, who had recently been released from prison. During the heated exchange, Edwin decided to shoot Charles. When the police arrived, Edwin initially claimed that Charles had taken his own life. However, inconsistencies in the evidence quickly led investigators to suspect foul play. Edwin later admitted to the shooting, claiming it was an act of self-defense. Despite his assertion, he was convicted of first-degree murder in May 1989 and sentenced to death. Reportedly, Edwin had stated months prior to the incident that if he ever saw his brother again, he would kill him. Edwin also claimed that he once discovered his wife and Charles in a compromising situation, which deepened his resentment. Additionally, he alleged that Charles owed him money. During his trial, Edwin requested the death penalty, stating he did not want to return to prison. Tragically, just 2 days after his sentencing, he took his own life. Fortunately for Lela Johnston's family, they could finally find peace, knowing that the person responsible for this heinous crime had faced justice. Number 3. In January 1977, the tranquility of Collingwood, Melbourne, was shattered by a crime so horrifying that it left an indelible scar on Australian history. 2 young women, Susan Bartlett and Suzanne Armstrong, met their tragic demise in their shared home at 147 Easey Street. Susan Bartlett, 27, was a dedicated schoolteacher known for her caring nature and love for education. Her best friend and housemate, Suzanne Armstrong, 28, was a single mother devoted to her 16-month-old son, Gregory. Together, they shared a small home, supporting each other through life's challenges. On the night of January 10, 1977, an unimaginable act of violence occurred. Susan and Suzanne were brutally attacked, stabbed multiple times in what appeared to be a frenzied and personal attack. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer was either invited in or had access to the house. 3 days later, on January 13th, concerned neighbors alerted authorities due to a foul smell emanating from the house. Inside, police discovered the horrific scene. Susan and Suzanne lay dead, their bodies bearing the marks of a savage attack. But amidst this horror, a miracle, Suzanne's son, Gregory, was found alive in his cot, dehydrated and distressed but unharmed. Despite intensive investigations, the case quickly went cold. No fingerprints, no clear motive, and no suspects. It seemed that the killer had vanished without a trace, leaving only questions behind. For decades, the case haunted investigators and the local community. Fast forward to the 2010s. Advancements in DNA technology gave investigators new hope. Biological evidence preserved from the crime scene was reanalyzed. A male DNA profile was identified, finally pointing to a potential suspect, Pericles Perry Kouramblis. An Australian Greek citizen, was a former student at the school where Susan Bartlett taught. In 2017, as police began seeking DNA samples from persons of interest, Kouramblis fled to Greece, a country that does not extradite its citizens. His sudden departure only deepened suspicions. For years, Kouramblis remained beyond the reach of Australian law. But in 2024, he made a fateful mistake. While traveling to Rome, he was arrested by Italian authorities, thanks to an international arrest warrant. Italy's extradition treaty with Australia meant he could finally be sent back to face justice. The exact motive behind the murders remains unclear. Investigators believe the crime was personal, potentially driven by rage or a troubled connection to the victims. DNA evidence, including a match to biological material found at the scene, was instrumental in linking Korumblis to the crime. As of now, we are still awaiting Pericles Korumblis's trial to begin, despite his claims of innocence. The Easey Street murders left a community shattered and a family broken. Gregory, who survived the tragedy, grew up without his mother. Now, decades later, there is hope that justice will finally be served, bringing some closure to this haunting chapter of Australian history. Thanks for watching. If you'd like me to cover other cold cases that were solved, feel free to leave a comment below.